I'm here at Question Everything, which is discussing the actual science around lockdown effectiveness, which has been censored, but here we are free to discuss it and share it live stream. And I've just met Alan Miller. Great to see you, Alan.
Good to see you in the real.
In the real, yeah. It's kind of weird here seeing all these heroes. You're the founder of Recovery, that's a primary group, but you've also founded other groups. You're doing a lot of activism in this whole kind of bizarre space.
Yeah, well, I was in hospitality and events and nightlife for around 25 years, putting on things all over the world and in the UK. And then I launched something called the Nighttime Industry Association, which lobbied for actually to stop restrictions on nightlife, which had been happening before COVID, where increasingly impositions were being put in a punitive fashion, and to have a debate about the broad benefits of the third biggest sector in Britain that has in society. And then, as you say, I with John, I co-founded with some other people and brought a lot of people from entertainment and hospitality into Recovery, because we wanted to get broader sectors to be able to come together, because it began to feel like to me that we weren't being listened to. Initially the government was listening, and then very suddenly the kind of shutter came down, and then I went on to launch Open for All, which is over 1,000 signatories in Britain of some of the largest chains and independents, nightclubs, festivals, bars, who are basically saying they're going to have absolutely no health paper checks at any of their events or premises. They don't see why we should be a checkpoint society. It's certainly not getting back to normal, and it's nobody's business. Particularly now we have 90% antibodies, and aside from all the technical issues, which is like logistical, security and everything, the idea of show me your papers to participate in normality is just wrong. So when the government said it's going to be voluntary, but if those transmissions go up, which who knows what that really means now, but if those transmissions go up, now the vulnerable and elderly are vaccinated, we may impose mandatory vaccine passports. You already see that the nudge and the threatening and everything is terribly damaging, and we're all saying we don't want it, we don't need it, they're unnecessary and discriminatory, and we are not going to have them.
Yeah, and indeed, what happened personal choice, because anyone who's vulnerable has the option now, and in England, UK has largely taken the preventative medication, so they're covered. And it was always about a few weeks to flatten the curve, and it was always about protecting the susceptible. And the medication, the vaccine, doesn't really change transmission. We're seeing that out of Israel data, and we kind of knew that anyway, and pharma themselves acknowledged that way back. So what is the logic behind demanding papers for everyone when the medication does not really change transmission much, and the vulnerable are now protected by said medication? There is no logic in this drive, but sadly most people have no clue of any of the science, so they believe it might be necessary. That's the problem?
Well, I think one of the things is logic has been jettisoned, because even on the very basis that they're arguing to have vaccine passports, people go on public transport on the way there after they've taken a test. So even if you were to accept every precondition that's been presented, forget the fact that the FDA have recorded over the lateral flow test as being not fit for purpose, forget the fact that when at the kind of levels we've got now, testing people continually often presents much higher figures than is actually illnesses or anything like that. Forget all of that. It doesn't stand up on its own merit. The FA at Wembley and at Wimbledon, they've got the either COVID ID, which has either a vaccine, demonstration of your vaccine status, or test. Now, a lot of people are just ticking them. And you could say, well, it's fine, we'll just do that, we'll say that it's negative. But actually it's bad faith, because we get into a situation of tick boxing, checking, and if you can check with that, if we're really treating this like the flu, but now we're saying we need to have a vaccine passport for that, we're going to then have it for everything. And then the answer to my illogical point would be, well, actually, Alan, you're right, let's have it on the public transport and let's have it everywhere. In fact, let's just have QR codes or tests everywhere, wherever we go. And all of a sudden you have a biotech situation where the very notion of a free citizen engaging on their own business without being regulated and like constantly surveyed goes away. So I think there's a big question for everyone in society. People sometimes think that hospitality is going to resolve this problem. They say, well, why don't you just do a strike? What people have to remember is about bars and venues in Britain is that they're highly regulated and licensed. It stems back from the past. It's all about regulating ordinary people, from the gin wars to the Defence of the Realm Act, and in the 80s and the 90s against acid house parties and everything. There's very strict regulation and licensing. So Events and the business sector and hospitality, 70 billion per annum in the UK, 10% of our employment force. It's not chump change. But in and of themselves, in order to really challenge this, we need the public to be engaged in this debate, to support their local venues and premises by saying things on social media, writing to their MPs, campaigning, lobbying and protesting, all the things that we should be free to do in a free society, and to really support venues. It's not going to be like just one sector is going to be able to do this. I think everyone needs to have their voices heard. It's really essential. I think we're at a moment in Britain where, well, around the world actually, but in Britain where we have some choices to make about the kind of society we want to be. Are we going back to normal? Are we going to get back to normal? We had 15 million jabs to freedom and different things being said. With the vulnerable and the elderly, those that want to, 99% of them are vaccinated, right? We need to be able to get on with life. We've got 13 million people waiting on the NHS. We have a whole range of issues in the economy, culture, and our way of life. Many people, we shouldn't be flippant about this, many people fought and died for these freedoms. And the idea that they're going to be cavalierly sort of stripped away and dispensed with is a real problem.
Yeah, no, it's completely outrageous, and people seem to have lost all sight of the principles we shared, like going back 100 years, that there's personal responsibility and there's personal autonomy and there's these inalienable rights that are sacred. They're part of what we are. And now people have lost sight of that, and it's like throw them away for a bad flu equivalent. So it's crazy. And the other thing I like about what you said is the boiling frog phenomenon, I call it. That, you don't notice how you're losing these things. And when you realize you're boiling and you're unhappy and you don't like what's happening and you're kind of in a form of East Germany scenario, it's too late then, because the power over you stops you complaining. So people, I agree, they need to complain now and say enough is enough. It is, we know from the data, a severe flu equivalent. It's not the flu, it was a tough virus, but it's a severe flu equivalent that's thousands of times more risky for the elderly and compromised. They now have the medication, we're done. That's what people need to be thinking.
Yeah, I think, it's really important that people talk to one another and their friends and everything. I mean, this has been quite divisive in a sense, and this hasn't just come around from COVID. I mean, we've seen it before. Everyone's talked about the culture wars. We saw it with Brexit, but it's on steroids with COVID. So between family members and others, and it's not surprising at one level because there's been a huge spend on this. Right, the government have taken our money and spent it back on. Quite frankly, frightening us. I mean, the whole CyB, the behavioural insights teams, the nudges, the campaign of fear that's been there, which has been because it's now become apparent that the government perhaps thought we wouldn't be scared enough to follow these rules. I think it's very disingenuous. We need much more public debate. We need much more honesty and transparency. We need to insist that our elected representatives are clear and honest with us. We need to have everything from cost-benefit analysis to a discussion about what is the good life, right? Is the good life one where, even if we were allegedly always healthy, whatever that means, is that worth giving up our freedom for? And you can't separate the two. Our health is predicated on us being free. This experiment of the last 300 years of enlightenment, of the idea of the individual that has agency and of representatives that you can recall, it's not everywhere. It's not everywhere in the world at the moment, and it's a unique experiment. And if we dispense with these things and let them be taken away, or just don't argue and fight for them, then we get into very dangerous water, or pots, as frogs, as you say.
That's it. And you know what? We're going to wrap it up because this is a tight one. But the word nonsense I have used more in the last year than in my whole life. And it's because it's nonsense, non-science. I have never seen such anti-scientific ideas pushed by the media and the governments for a whole year. But the other word that's come in creeping to me recently, which is quite harsh, is cowardice. And I'm beginning more and more to judge my fellow people in UK and Ireland as having a streak of yellow. Now, is that being a bit harsh?
I think the thing is that I will always take the responsibility that and I've been very unhappy with lots of political scenarios in my life, and I've just not been good enough at convincing enough people. And I think that's the position that we should all have, because like some people like to call people names and shame them, call them COVID idiots or whatever, I'm also concerned with people who are against lockdowns and others who call everyone stupid or sheep. What it means is that you don't think that you've got the capability to convince them. You don't think you have the efficacy of your ideas, and you see people as objects, not subjects, as means, not as ends in themselves. Now, they are fellow citizens, and we make the world. And I can guarantee, I know that the second that the majority of people start exercising their impact, things will change very quickly. You only have to look at the football. The football's a really good example, right? When they were like, we're not going to do this with the European League, and then more recently with football, that you begin to see what it means for the public, we the people. You know, Shelley's point, ye many, they few. But obviously, you got to be, well, in my opinion, if you want to have a democratic situation, you've got to be able to convince people, and we have to win hearts and minds. And I think that courage comes from a couple of things. It comes from having a clarity of vision and also believing in something. And if, you know, I think it's on me and all of us to be able to win hearts and minds with different people in our families, with our neighbours, with the public generally. It's different to Brexit in the sense that, you know, during Brexit, regardless of anyone's view, everyone was brought onto the TV and elsewhere. We've been marginalised in this discussion. However, I don't want to use excuses as to why things can't happen. We have seen that many more people have come out on protests. A lot of people are asking now, what's going on? What's going on with these travel restrictions? What's going on with, well, we've had so many vaccinations now, you keep changing the goal. But there are good questions and they're important. What we have to be able to do is be able to engage and try and convince and give a lead and win people to that. Because in the end, when enough people say enough's done, it will be done immediately. And the government are obsessed by polling, and there's a kind of loop that goes on, right? I think they're somewhat chaotic has been their response, and all over the place, and make it up as they go along. I don't believe there's this master plan. I think actually it's more terrifying that there's not, because they're just kind of, you just think, wait a minute, where are you going? And it keeps changing. And I think that what needs to happen is we need to have a clarion call for rationality, for reasonableness, for calmness, to say, look, let's get this into perspective and balance. We're fellow citizens. We may disagree. We're not going to take the same approach that we're going to start naming you, like shaming you, and that. We're going to say, look, we've got a common interest here, which is what kind of world do we want to live in, what kind of society do we want to live in, and how are we going to work that together. And I think that can be the approach, and hopefully, you know, people will be courageous.
Yeah, that'll be a bonus. And I agree totally. I mean, Alan, when I say that, I say it just as a discussion, but I don't direct those kind of slurs at people. But I just think that an inherent cowardice has crept into the population over the last 30 years. We've become safest. We've lost the edge that made us human, and I think that part of that has fed into the absurdity of the last year, or the nonsense, as I said. But we'll
to be continued.
Brilliant.
Thanks a lot. We can hug as well, can't we?
Because yeah.
Don't forget to subscribe, and also to hit that little bell icon to make sure you're informed and get to counter some of the more corporate style science that's out there. So all the links are in the description box below, and also really appreciate all my PayPal and Patreon supporters and anyone else who can continue to support me to provide all the material that I do. It's highly appreciated. So thank you.